My name's Jeanette Pierce. I'm the executive director of the Detroit Experience Factory. The Detroit Experience Factory is a nonprofit that I started 10 years ago to help connect locals and visitors to Detroit's people, places, and projects. So we do educational and experiential tours around the city and operate the Community Welcome Center. And now we're an affiliate of the Downtown Detroit Partnership as well. So I'm a lifelong city resident. I've never not lived in the city proper. But I moved downtown in 2003, and I started walking around places, seeing things in a whole new light, learning more about my city every day, which was amazing because I thought I knew Detroit. I lived here my whole life. And the more I learned about Detroit, the more I loved it and more wanted to be a part of it and invest in it with all my time and energy. And I wanted to be able to share the information I was learning with other people. And so that's why we started what's now the Detroit Experience Factory. When we first started doing tours and helping educate people about Detroit, there weren't a lot of resources to help small business or social entrepreneurship. I mean, that wasn't even a term, right? But we still thought it was important, and we had the passion and we had the knowledge about the city. We wanted to share that first-person perspective, what it's like to actually live here, we really grew and opened the first welcome center in the history of Detroit, like a brick and mortar welcome center. It was supposed to be a pop-up, but we were there for almost 7 years and just started doing it. So that's the thing. We didn't talk a lot. We didn't plan a lot. We just started it. And 10 years later, we've taken 70,000 people on experiential tours around the city, and 67% of those people are locals, because it's so important for locals to understand the history of their city, and not just for random facts and figures or dates, or because there's going to be some test some way, but because the history has brought us to where we are today. And more importantly, if you don't understand your history and your past, then you're not going to be fully equipped to have a positive impact on your future. There's a lot of myths about Detroit, a lot of misinformation or half-truths, and we try to clear those up with facts as well as personal experience, because all of our staff and tour guides are city residents, which is really important. So some of the bigger myths include grocery stores, right? So Chris Hansen said on national television that we don't have grocery stores in the city of Detroit, and that's just not true. We have over 100 full-service grocery stores in the city, and full service meaning fruit, vegetables, dairy, and a meat counter. So putting an orange on a liquor store shelf doesn't count. There's actually, as a friend of mine said, more food rainforests than there are food deserts. Now, does that mean we don't have food access issues? No, we of course not, but it's a different question, and it helps kind of frame that conversation. Another question that people ask a lot about is, crime. Am I going to step into Detroit and something bad happened to me? And certainly crime is an issue in the city. A lot of our crime is not random, and I've lived in the city my whole life. I grew up on the east side. I've been downtown for 13 years, and I feel completely safe walking around at all hours, morning, day, night, afternoon. And experiencing the city, I think, helps people feel safer and more knowledgeable about their surroundings, which leads to a feeling of safety as well. When someone asks us about 1967, or more frequently, it's somebody telling us that it was because of 1967 that X, Y, or Z happened, or that's what's wrong with Detroit is because of 1967, when that's just not true. Quick answer is that we had already been losing population for 15 years by the time 1967 happened, and there were a lot of policies in place for decades before that really led to what happened in 1967. So it was more of a symptom than a cause of Detroit's problems, and when you really actually understand some of those policies and those issues that led to 67, I think you have a better understanding of where we even are today, and most importantly, where we're going in the future. So certainly I was not alive in 1967, but my parents were, and they lived here in the city, so there's some contacts that I get from them. I was very lucky to have my first job out of college be at United Way, and we actually did a project for the 40th anniversary, and I got to listen to panels and hear from Sheila Cockrell and Shirley Stancato and others about both their experience as well as how educating people and framing the reality versus the telephone game that has happened, that even for people who did who were alive, I should say, in 1967, they might not have had firsthand experience of what was actually happening, and there's a lot of myths that have kind of built up around 1967 that are just not true. There's a lot of misinformation around it. So I was really lucky to be able to talk to some local experts who have studied it, both lived it and studied it, and helped for decades try to inform and educate people here in Detroit about what was really the situation. When people hear the word tour, a lot of times they just assume tourist. And certainly we don't turn tourists away, but that is not our main focus. Our focus are locals, and locals use us for a myriad of different reasons. We are part of attraction retention for a lot of companies. When certain companies like Quicken Loans, 100 times last year, we got in a car one-on-one with a candidate who was maybe going to be moving here to take a job, because they might like the job, but they hear all this negative information about Detroit, and so they might not want to. So we can help close that for a company. Existing employees, they might think, oh, I want to go to Chicago, or I might go somewhere else, and that type of thing. But we can show them that Detroit is actually a very vibrant city with lots of amenities, but maybe they just didn't know about it. We do things for universities and schools and second grade and sixth grade and 60-year-olds. And I mean, there's really nothing that we can't use Detroit as a classroom. So that's, I think, the main push is that people are looking to learn about something, whatever that topic is. We can help show them that, or help teach them what they're looking for by using Detroit as a classroom. The before and after for people that come on our tours is honestly what keeps me going. I mean, especially early on when we weren't making any money and didn't, have resources and such, but the look on people's faces and the continually learning things again with them and seeing their expressions. And most importantly, it's really about changing people's idea of what their quality of life is in the region. When they learn more about the past, the present, and they feel like they can be part of the future, they're much happier just living here in Detroit or metropolitan Detroit. And we absolutely see those changes in just a short tour. And it's really wonderful because there's a lot of big issues, obviously, in this city and this country, right? It's not unique to Detroit. And you can't solve them overnight. Even if you knew the answer, you cannot wave a wand and make it happen overnight. But in 1 hour, 2 hours, one day, the impact that we're able to have on people's quality of life, on the way they think about something, on so many things, is actually relatively simple and has a huge impact. So to be able to have something where you know the answer, you know what needs to be done, you do it, and you get that desired outcome right away, it's like instant gratification, and it's pretty amazing. Well, 67, again, really trying to understand 67, we're talking about, a lot of different things, and there's a lot of people talking about it, but it was not a true race riot, right? So even using the term riot, it's been classified as a rebellion, an uprising, lots of different things. And that's not just a semantics thing. I mean, we didn't have blacks and whites fighting each other in the street. This was an oppressed and physically abused population, by the people in power that were really, sick of it. And it wasn't unique to Detroit either. It was happening all across the country. We had a real, quote unquote, race riot in 1943. And how come we didn't have a 60th anniversary, because people don't know that. Because the memory is either gone or because maybe we grew in population after the race riot of 1943, so it doesn't fit people's, story of riot population decline, because if that held true, then we would have had population decline after 1943 when we didn't. So there's that. In terms of the issues and strife that is happening in the city today, I am actually hopeful that because we are, most of us, working together, and you have communities, neighborhoods all around the city where amazing things are happening, whether it's dense neighborhoods that have always been stable, like a Sherwood Forest or an East English Village, or even neighborhoods that have seen some of the most disinvestment, like Brightmoor. But in the whole spectrum of neighborhoods. We are seeing small businesses, we're seeing communities working together, we're seeing blacks and whites and all different kinds coming together, and the people that have stayed and the people that are coming, the one thing that they have in common above all else is that they want to be a part of something bigger. They all want something better for the city, for their neighborhood, for their community. And that tends to link people. And so that's why I'm really, you can say optimistic, but I think it really is actually a realistic. It's when you talk to the people and you see what's happening. And also when people talk about the only downtown or the, downtown versus the neighborhoods, that's something that we're always trying to help people understand better. It's not versus, it's not either or, it's both. And there's tons of wonderful investment happening in the neighborhoods, from Motor City Match to Any Ideas, to just CDCs like Grandma and Rosedale, who isn't new and newfangled. They've been around 25 years doing amazing things in their community, right? And a lot of times, again, we just don't know that. We don't know what's happening in our own city. We hear the headlines, and a lot of times the headline writers don't know either, which is part of the issue. So the more that people can be made aware of the positive things, of the successes, the more that you have the energy to keep working on the issues and challenges. And for a long time, there was this, and I think it's still prevalent, though a little bit less, there was this idea that if you said anything positive, you said, hey, look at this small business that's thriving in, Scotty Simpson's Fish and Chips in Brightmoor. If you said, look at this, people would say, oh, but what about this? And they're not mutually exclusive. Good and bad things are not in a vacuum. They exist simultaneously in every city at the same time, right? And we have to know the good things to want to keep working on some of the challenges. And I actually am seeing, I think for the first time, we are seeing momentum, not just in downtown and midtown, absolutely, but all throughout the city. And because you have a collaboration of the grassroots and the community organizers, you have small businesses, you have nonprofit sector, you have private sector, and now even the government, all kind of moving for the most part in one direction, or at least willing to talk to each other, communicate, and build those relationships. And I think that if there's there's a lot of reasons 67 happened, but I think a breakdown of relationships and a lack of respect was a really big part of that. And I think that we actually have lots of relationships going on in the city that will move us forward in a positive way. Too often there's two major narratives that come out of Detroit when you're talking about it, whether it's either the media or just in general conversation. It's either, we downtown, or, oh, blight, and that type of stuff. But the majority of the city are regular people living regular lives in regular neighborhoods. And that's who you don't hear about as often. There's 700,000 people, give or take, in the city right now, and that is not a small amount of people. That's really important to imagine. We have this concept sometimes that, oh, nobody's left, or poor us, or from outside that, there's nothing going on there. When 700,000 people has never been a small amount of people. And it's actually, we have the same square mileage as Atlantic. There's also this myth that Detroit's really huge, square mileage-wise. Not true, actually. We're 65th in the nation in terms of square mileage. We're 2/3 the size of Chicago, half the size of New York, and 1/3 the size of Los Angeles. But to go apples to apples, as close as you can, so maybe it's, different types of apples, but Atlanta's around exactly the same size as the city of Detroit, but we have more than 100,000 people than they do. Portland's almost the exact same size as the city of Detroit, but we have 100,000 more people. So this is not a small amount of people. And the neighborhoods where people are living, if you don't live in that neighborhood, you don't know about it a lot. And that kind of makes sense, because who goes driving around residential neighborhoods? That's not a thing. If you don't know somebody in that neighborhood, you probably haven't been there. Or if there isn't a destination, a bar, a restaurant, a museum. So that's why people kind of know downtown, midtown, because there are things here that are for everybody. And in the neighborhoods, you have these residents that, they're just going about their normal lives. But we are starting to see some real investment and even existing businesses that have thrived for decades. Many of them have survived, and it's important to really recognize the people that have been here, that have been doing things, as well as support the new businesses and growing part of Detroit as well. When we are talking with young people or taking them around, a big part of that is showing them what it's like to be a grown-up in the city. Because a lot of people who've lived in the city or the suburbs, and they quote-unquote know Detroit. And it's not discounting what they do know, and even myself, I was my first convert, right? I lived in the city my whole life, but being a grown-up somewhere is very different, and we haven't really told that narrative before. Like, you can live somewhere where you walk to bars and restaurants, where you walk to things, and you don't have to go to Chicago or New York for that. You can afford to live here, and even though rents are rising, there's still lots of affordable places for all throughout the greater downtown, and certainly throughout the city. But that's what we tell young people all the time, and that's why they want to be here. Once you show them, they're very excited to be here and to stay here, and that's really important. We have to tell them, we have to show them this side of the city, that it is a vibrant city center, which is what mostly young people want. Otherwise, they are going to leave. And even if we fix the schools tomorrow and we graduated every single kid in the city of Detroit, if all of them left, that's not going to help us either. And the ones that we do succeed in these amazing kids, when a lot of times they leave. So how can we help show them? And we're not going to sell them. We're not going to tie them down. But if they can make an informed decision. So when people say, why Detroit, or what would you say to a young person who's thinking about staying in the city or moving here after graduation, this is what I have to say. We can walk to, if you live in the core, you can walk or bike to 316 bars and restaurants downtown. And that's every type. And we actually have a checklist, if you don't believe me, with more opening all the time. We have 13,000 theater seats, the second largest theater district in the entire country. We have 3 major sports stadiums really close, and I think we take that for granted, because other cities might have them, but they're very spread out. We have Camas Martius Park and the river, all these big city things. But we know our neighbors. We know the owners of the bars and restaurants and shops, because frequently they are our neighbors. There's a sense of community, a sense of collaboration here that doesn't, I think, exist in other places that also have the amazing city assets that we have. And most importantly, we do want to be a part of something bigger. And so when people, anytime people say, why Detroit, for a lot of different reasons, my answer is that Detroit is big enough to matter in the world, but small enough where you can matter in it. And I wouldn't live anywhere else. So though I've lived in the city my whole life, I certainly have traveled. I did study abroad in Spain, and that's where I kind of got the bug. I said, wow, I love Spain, but I love Detroit. Well, I'll take what I loved about Spain and make it happen. And that's why I haven't driven to work in 13 years. I got rid of my car 4 years ago because I wasn't driving it for a month at a time. And that is possible here in the city, especially in the core. I rarely, find a city. I guess it would have to be probably a non-U.S. city. It would probably be a Malaga, which is where I lived in Spain, which is on the southern coast. Not Madrid, not Barcelona, or some of these huge places, but a place where, again, big enough to have assets, but not too big that you get lost in everything, right? So, but I think actually, as I travel, a lot of other cities in America and across the world, they're actually looking at Detroit for answers, to learn things, and sometimes locals are really shocked by that, right? What do we have, because you always know your issues, your family, your personal, this, what you know. But when you look at a bigger picture and you actually can compare things and put them in context, the grass isn't always greener, or maybe it's fake grass, and it's something completely different. And so we've actually been able to, with this crisis comes opportunity and the ability to be very, even though this word is overused, but very innovative here in the city, that other folks are actually looking to us and learning from us. And I think that's really exciting, because if we get this right, we will be the example of what a 21st century post-industrial city should and could be like. I certainly have concerns about the city. And we do actually talk about the things that we're concerned about and everybody's concerned about on tours. It's not just a rose-colored glasses thing. You have to understand and know and talk about the bad, but understanding the hows and what so we can start moving it forward. So certainly, I think on most people's list is going to be education, right? And this is, again, not unique to Detroit, though sometimes it is a little bit worse here, but this is a crisis we're facing across the country. And whether it's, but we're also starting to see some movement, like focusing on early education, early childhood development. But we really have to get the STEM and STEAM now, right? Science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. But we see all the time that there's companies desperate to hire people that we don't have here, or sometimes even in the country, from a skill set standpoint. Also, that we have gotten so far away from the skilled trades, because there are great jobs. And the concern is that even if we all decided on the answer today, it's going to take a generation to some extent to implement some of these changes. So that's certainly an issue. But it's important to recognize that anything that we're concerned about or any issue that we have doesn't mean everything else should stop, right? It's not impossible. We've seen, Detroit burnt to the ground in 1805, right? So there's a reason we're called the Renaissance City. There's a reason our motto on the city seal is Speramus meliora resurgit generibus, which means we hope for better things that will arise from the ashes. It's about cycles. It's every 100 years we're pretty much reinventing ourselves. And we have picked ourselves up from the bottom of the bottom before and turned that around. And I think that we're in that cycle right now, and we have a really bright future ahead of us. There are a lot of exciting things happening, and I think it is important to recognize that it isn't necessarily going to be one big thing, like we've kind of had in the past, and it's going to be a million little things. And that's why it is exciting, is because every person has the ability to be a part of that, be a part of Detroit's future. Every person has the ability, the opportunity to be one of those, exciting little things and be a part of Detroit's future. Some things that I'm really excited about include Motor City Match, right? I think this is going to be a game changer, and a long-term, not just a silver bullet, dump some money and be gone type of thing, but a citywide, sustainable game changer, because it's about getting entrepreneurs into vacant retail spaces throughout the city. And you think, well, why do you need a program to do that? There's an empty building and there's an entrepreneur, you should just go there. Not that simple. There's all these barriers, who owns the building? How do you get a hold of them? And then you need 40 grand in electrical work before you could even start to do your build out. And so that the fact that the Detroit Economic Growth Corporation, the city of Detroit, the local CDCs are all working together to really get rid of some of those barriers is really exciting, because what we're going to see, and we're already starting to see, retail strips filled in, and what that's going to do is become an asset to the neighborhood that it's located in, provide jobs close by in the neighborhood, because another one of the issues obviously we have is transit, though the Regional Transit Authority coming hopefully very soon. Everybody vote yes in November. But because our transit isn't super great, we need to have jobs closer to where people live. And the Motor City Match will help that happen as well. And then just the entrepreneurs themselves being able to create these businesses, create jobs, and live their dream here in the city, which is, as cheesy as it sounds, really one of the few American cities where that is possible. You can say, hey, I've always wanted to do this. And there's a lot of support here to make it happen. And I think Motor City Match and other entrepreneurial resources like the Build Institute, which has graduated over almost 1,000 small businesses through an 8-week program from every zip code in the city of Detroit, majority minority, majority women. These are, lifelong residents for the most part that are helping them go from an idea to a space, right? And I think that's going to be one of the most exciting things as we look forward. It's really unfortunate how segregated we are today, right? We're actually, depending on what you're looking at in stats and all that, either more segregated than we were, 50 years ago, or certainly very close to that in the region. And that is a scary thought. Because when we're talking about young people, when we're talking about any people, but especially as we look towards the future, young people being able to interact with people that are different than them is one of the things that really will make a bright future. And so if we don't have that opportunity for people, and it's not just black, white, it's not just that simple, it's a lot of different, just people that think differently, from different incomes, certainly different backgrounds as well. That was one of the great things about living in the city. My parents, bought a new house in 1979 and could have bought it anywhere, and they purposely bought a house in the city, and they weren't trying to make a point, they weren't martyrs. That's a really important thing too, that I'm not a martyr, I'm not making a point, neither were my parents. We like our quality of life here in the city. We like having neighbors that are different than us. We like having homes that are more than 10 years old. We like the walkability and the sense of community in neighborhoods. But you need to have an opportunity for young people to interact with people that are different and have different experiences. And that's where one of our goals is to get every student in the city of Detroit on a tour of their own city, to meet with people, the successful small business in their neighborhood, to talk to people at other schools in different neighborhoods, to see beyond their 1 or 2 block radius or even neighborhood, to what the city as a whole can offer. Because we actually have the diversity, but it's very siloed and very separate. And I really would love to see neighborhoods crossing. One of our ideas is what we call the neighborhood swap, where we actually take East Siders to the West Side and introduce them to each other and meet and talk and visit a coffee shop and go to the park and know each other a little bit more. And then that could be also, as a region, I think, a really great opportunity. But we absolutely need to get young people interacting with people that are different than them so that they can learn to build those relationships and work together towards a brighter future. The Home Rule Act of 1909, which allowed for us to have 131 municipalities, for me, that's the #1 domino. Honestly, it's not 1967, it's not, if you look at a lot of, and the highways come later, but we created a system and policies that promoted the idea of locating outside the city, drawing a line, and keeping to yourself. So the gross points are a great example. There's 5 separate gross points altogether. They're 11 square miles, and each one has their own mayor, city council, police, and park department. Does that make any sense? It does. And it's not a pick on Grosse Pointe, but we have this history of separation, not just city suburb, not just black white, but we separate from each other into these little enclaves, into these 131 municipalities, half of which are under 5 square miles, and that's been our history. But moving forward, we're actually seeing great strides in regionalism. Regionalism, which is not just a fluffy word, it's an economic imperative because other cities have it built in. If you look at New York, you have 5 boroughs, twice the landmass of the city of Detroit, but you have 1 mayor, 1 transit system, 1 school system, and you can get things a lot done more efficiently. If we were the same size as New York, 42 of our suburbs would be part of Detroit. Or even if they were their own city, think about the time, the money that is wasted, and the arguments that happen over me versus you. But some of the ways that we're starting to move forward, because that is pretty depressing. But then we do see things that I would never have thought about, even just 5-10 years ago. Cobo Center, one of our first regional successes, right? The Detroit Institute of Arts millage, huge, right? That we actually could have this regional arts millage happen that makes the DIA possible. And coming up, the Regional Transit Authority is going to be also one of the biggest game changers in the region because it's really about connecting to jobs across the region. And it's in connection with the M1 rail or Q line, which is a piece of a larger transit plan. And they really have done some amazing work on that plan. And if we can get that passed, it'll be a really big help to having our region catch up to other cities and metropolitan areas across the country. It's so important for locals to know about the history and the great things happening because a lot of times we're our own worst enemies. We see the headlines, which is very negative. A lot of times, though, there's also really good stuff that you see headlines of, but sometimes people forget about that. I don't remember that I saw that. And they really focus on these negative things. But when you ask Detroiters or Metro Detroiters about Detroit, it's this very, it sucks, but I love it sometimes. And that's the positive side, right? And But a lot of times it's because they don't realize the assets, or they haven't been out, or we're all creatures of habit. It's easy to go to the same 3 places that you've always gone, and because of the highways, you drive in, you drive out, you park, and you're not really experiencing it. People from out of town that come here, and this is why I think part of it is that we have all this new energy from newcomers, because they're seeing it with a fresh light, and they come here and they love it, and they've been other places and they don't like those places. They like Detroit better. But Detroiters have a tendency to be, and again, metropolitan Detroiters have a tendency to be our own worst enemies. And certainly because they do know about the issues that exist, but rarely are they actually finding out about the good things that are happening. And out-of-towners see and experience the good things and actually go in search of it. That's what it's about. Locals assume they know. So stop learning, stop looking for things, stop seeing new things. Where out-of-towners or people moving here know they don't know, so they go and search. And when they go and search and they meet people and they see small businesses and they find some amazing parts of Detroit that sometimes then they know more about, or certainly different things about Detroit than people who have lived in the area their entire life. And that's why educating and experiencing is so important, because if our locals can get behind us as a region and we can all work together, then it's going to be really great. Why we focus on locals is because locals can use the information. If an out-of-towner finds something they love and they go, that is great, but it is just normally one time. But a local can go back to that small business, can volunteer at that nonprofit we talked about, can share the story, can bring others, their neighbors, and tell other people about it, and actually utilize that information more. And that's why it's all about focusing on locals and educating them and getting them connected to Detroit's people, places, and projects.